the idea that somehow we are expected to experience cities primarily through our eyes, and the rest of our body becomes passive. And obviously skateboarders do look, but it's also about muscles, it's about sound, it's about vibration, it's about texture, it's about smell, it's about touching architecture.
This idea that the city is a contested, socially produced, imagined, material, ecological kind of space. What you get with the rise of cartography is that it's not simply that these maps are used to describe the world, but actually they provide a model for thinking about the world that you can then use to describe and to reason and to build. So that you can make a map of somewhere like Stratford, and from that map you can actually reason, oh, this road should go there, that neighbourhood should be moved over there.
So what is an infrastructure to us might be the train tracks on which we ride. To a conductor or people who are fixing the rails, infrastructure, the ground turns into figure. So it's not infrastructure to everybody at the same moment.
Although sometimes I am thinking about the kind of roads and sewers, the kind of material stuff, I'm also kind of thinking about the labour to which these products circulate all these features.
What constitutes infrastructure means things to people of different subjectivities, particularly if you're looking at the infrastructures of bureaucracy. But you could look at things like measurement standards, technical protocols, naming conventions, even the forms that you have to fill out at the doctor's office.
Thinking about that, it might be useful to think like what are the limits of infrastructure. At the same time, almost everything you can point to in this room, from the projector to the camera to you to the seats, could be a form of infrastructure of some kind.
But ultimately, who is this work for? I think is the biggest question.
So what I'm kind of aiming for is to create some form of studio space for more practical research and to find ways to bridge art and science.
With mentioning Ben earlier, in your own journal, how you have pieces where there's poetry or there might be photography. I don't know, but I had not encountered that combination of the novel or the narrative form of architecture, but with the film, for example, that is very common.
So I think is really interesting about the way you thought about this straight away is this sense of kind of responsibility to the subjects, how to maybe create something that the domestic workers themselves would produce and maybe help understand their own situation.
We initially started the question by saying, how did the fall of the wall impact graffiti in the decade that followed? And then we changed the question to, does the fall of the wall impact the evolution of graffiti on either side of it during the decade that followed? And if so, then how?
So in the 80s and 90s, graffiti is quite like a transgressive act. But your idea of mapping and decoding it seems kind of counter to that. And it's how could you bring that transgressiveness back into your own work?
On the other hand, the materials speak, and you can get that kind of interaction between you and the space. But there's the other thing in visual anthropology of sometimes there is no meaning beyond the act of doing it, so it's kind of process versus product.
I guess some really good ideas from Alistair and Francesca about looking at oral histories and maybe how looking at the history of housing struggles and activism might help to define a kind of a different idea of home, which is something that residents want to defend rather than something which urban planners want to impose.
What they discovered is that the coordinate system, this cartographic way of thinking the world, was absolutely perfect. The issue wasn't the coordinate system. The issue was the continental plate, which was slowly moving northwards. And so again, this kind of the impulse to be able to link this imaginary coordinate with a physical space, and the anxiety when the physical space itself is actually moving.
What traces are there of what existed before the Olympic Park and Westfield? Because we're not really sure what was there before.
And in the 17th century.
It's a bit strange. Because it looks like there's a little road. Maybe you have to turn left and then you go round this thing.
Yeah, we could have got there without...
So we were there, weren't we?
Yeah, we couldn't have accessed it without getting past that fence. Okay.
You know, a kind of psychological fear was manifesting, this tragedy in a way, and not the bomb.
Normally, I would normally go out and see what's there first, and then start trying to piece together a legend, but that legend now.
So going out with the legend in mind isn't really practical, as you don't know what's out there. You could not actively engage with people and just record parts of the space, maybe photographs.
Where are we going to go? Because this map covers more than just Russell Square.
Sometimes, probably you can use the quantitative, like systematic sampling of some signs, but in my research design, it doesn't work like this.
Divide the whole project based on different levels of space, from the bodily through to the street to the district, and that these different spatial levels lend itself to different levels of analysis.
Let more than one mark exist at a time. That way it might be possible to look at the map and say, oh, here's concentrations of power, here's concentrations of mystery.
Someone has to support publishing, and so the question is, who's supporting it? A lot of editing work is unpaid. A lot of peer review, we were talking about this during the break, peer review processes are unpaid.
Writing the articles themselves is unpaid,
right,
because it used to be that you did your studies, you got your academic job, and then you published. But now you have to publish before getting the job. In order to get the job,
the thing that bothers me, because good research needs time, right?
We were looking into it through this fence, and I wondered how would you map somewhere like this?
See, that's the blocked off bit of the road, so that should go through, but it currently doesn't go through. Those are the buildings behind. That's Westfield and so on behind, and this is a building store.
Thank you.
So it's also pointing to the history of the place. So in this sense, the place is made both relational and historical by materiality.
I mean, going into it, we kind of assumed that it was a regeneration project that maybe didn't foreground history so much. It just feels very extreme here, the decontextualization of urban regeneration. It's kind of a parody of it almost in some ways.
So we looked for history, but we found the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa.
I guess it's a case where you're kind of looking at the ways in which people were moving in and around the arranged infrastructure of the park.
What kind of motivation they would choose to use the desired route instead of the constructed route.
Making a digital map of this, you'd probably have the infrastructure as one layer, the trees themselves as another layer, the laborers pathway is one, the different individuals as their own layers. So that's kind of how you would make a GIS-based map that you could then turn on and off the layers to see how they intersect with one another.
But then, what happens if how do you map? How do you use our layered approaches to mapping to map layering in the environment?
There are three things here, all with peak frequencies of about 45 kilohertz, which then goes, is there some sort of common thing happening at each of these locations that could then be a route for investigation?
Do you want to divide into groups and come up with questions about turning articles into a larger product? It could be a book, it could be some other kind of larger goal that you have.
It sometimes sounds kind of easy to do because it seems so clear to use, but then trying to describe it in words, that's tough.
You can do a monograph as well. Is this your intention?
I mean, hopefully, yeah. I mean, publish 2 or 3 of the chapters as articles and then publish the whole thing as a book in the best case scenario.
at this point you already have something, you already have some text, you already know which way you're going, you've made some discoveries, you can start thinking practical. And now I think it's a bit too soon, you should give yourself freedom.
How do you take academic piece of work and extend that with your artistic or creative piece? I think it's interesting from the perspective of how do we disseminate knowledge that's generated within the academic community.
You have this ability at the dissertation stage to really do something innovative in a way that really will set you up for the changes that are going to be happening in academic culture, which are going to be all about moving away from the strict definition, narrow definition of what knowledge is and how to disseminate it. I think that change is taking place.
Maps don't only describe worlds, but they also propose how we should see worlds, and then in doing so, inscribe those worlds.
That is actually what that is lovely, actually. And also it's appropriate to feel anxiety about trying to make a really clear map, because when you're making a really clear map, it means that you're like bulldozing over something inevitably.
So it's a reimagination of the possibilities of architecture through the act of the body. But also it's transgressive. Wonderful things can come out of architecture, but they may not be the things that you planned them to be.